Jasmine Crockett was denied her rights simply because of her political views, insulted and humiliated right at the hotel's front desk. But when the truth came to light, the entire hotel was forced to remain silent. How would Jasmine exact her revenge after such mistreatment? This story isn't just about justice. It's a powerful lesson on the strength of truth in a society plagued with injustice. And you'll be stunned by what happens next. Jasmine Crockett walked into the grand lobby of the Riccio Grand, one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. She had just come from a long, grueling day full of meetings, political accusations, and media attacks. Felt like she had reached her limit. She needed a place to unwind, somewhere to escape the constant pressure. The Riccio Grand seemed like the perfect destination for the relaxation she desperately sought. The hotel, with its classic architecture and opulent marble columns, gleamed under the warm golden glow from the sparkling crystal chandeliers. It was a serene and elegant space that Jasmine hoped would help her ease her mental burdens. She gently rolled her suitcase across the polished stone floor, her mind briefly calming. Everything around her appeared peaceful. The front desk staff and hotel employees moved about their work with quiet professionalism, blending seamlessly into the perfect setting. A sense of calm washed over Jasmine, but little did she know, this moment of apparent tranquility would mark the beginning of an unforeseen, intense confrontation. As soon as she entered, Jasmine felt a change in the air. This wasn't the calm she had expected. There was something heavy, uncomfortable about the atmosphere. She couldn't put her finger on it, but an odd sensation seemed to linger in the lobby. The eyes of the front desk staff flicked over her with suspicion, though no one spoke a word. The usual sounds of the hotel, which should have added to the peaceful ambience, now made Jasmine feel tense and uneasy. Jasmine stood frozen at the front desk for what felt like an eternity, the oppressive weight of the atmosphere pressing down on her. The Riccio Grand, known for its elegance and sophistication, seemed to pulse with an invisible tension. The luxury of the surroundings, the gleaming marble columns, the soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers, did little to alleviate the suffocating discomfort she felt. In fact, it only intensified it. The lobby, so serene in appearance, now felt stifling, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. Jasmine glanced around, trying to focus on the beauty of the space, but everything seemed distorted. The silence that hung in the air was unnerving, broken only by the faint clicking of the front desk staff's keyboards and the rustling of papers. Yet in this supposed sanctuary, Jasmine could feel every pair of eyes in the room seemingly fixated on her. It wasn't the calm she had expected. It was an unspoken tension, a sense of alienation that gripped her the moment she stepped through the door. It started subtly, like a whispering breeze, but now it was undeniable. Her gaze landed on the front desk employee, Avery. Jasmine had noticed her immediately, sitting at her post with a laser focus on the screen in front of her. Avery's light blue-dyed hair contrasted sharply against the neutral tones of the lobby, and the soft thud of her fingers against the keyboard echoed in Jasmine's ears. Despite her concentration, Jasmine sensed a deliberate avoidance in the way Avery held herself. It was as if the young woman was doing everything she could to avoid looking up, to avoid acknowledging Jasmine's presence. A cold realization hit Jasmine. Something was off. Avery's body language spoke volumes. There was an underlying hostility, a subtle rejection, and that Jasmine couldn't ignore. She stood silently, studying Avery, trying to make sense of the situation. The longer she waited, the more the tension in the air grew thicker. Other guests continued their quiet conversations, and staff members carried on with their work. But Jasmine felt as though she were in a completely different world, one where she didn't belong. Unable to wait any longer, Jasmine made a decision. She approached the desk and gently tapped the surface. The sound of the soft knock rang out, sharp and clear in the otherwise still air. It was a small action, but in the stillness of the moment it felt monumental. Her signal to Avery, and perhaps to the rest of the world, that she wouldn't be ignored. Avery's head snapped up at the sound, her gaze flicking to Jasmine for just a fraction of a second before quickly moving away, her eyes dropping back to the screen. The brief look was enough for Jasmine to catch the flicker of something. perhaps recognition, perhaps disdain. But something unmistakable was in Avery's eyes. It wasn't just indifference. Jasmine could sense the disdain simmering beneath the surface. A subtle shift in the room made her pulse quicken. It was as though the air had changed. And it wasn't just in her head. Avery knew exactly who Jasmine was, and something in her posture shifted, growing colder. There was a moment of silence as Avery continued to type, the clacking of keys almost mocking in its persistence. Jasmine stared at her unblinking, a rush of irritation flooding her chest, but she kept her composure. She had faced adversity, hostility, worse even in her political career. But this was something new. The weight of Avery's deliberate disregard was sharper, more pointed. It was a power play, and Jasmine wasn't about to back down. Finally, Avery spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "Hello? How can I assist you?" Her tone was polite enough, but there was an unmistakable edge, an undercurrent of something darker, something insincere. Jasmine forced a smile, her lips curling into something meant to be pleasant, but inside, her blood was boiling. "I have a reservation. My name is Jasmine Crockett," she said, her words crisp and deliberate. She wanted to make sure Avery heard every syllable. Avery stopped typing, but her eyes never left the screen. Instead, her eyes flicked to Jasmine quickly, a barely perceptible smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Then, the words left her lips, coated in venom. "Oh, you're Jasmine Crockett?" she asked. Her eyes never fully met Jasmine's. "I suppose you're well known, or at least you have quite a strong voice in political debates," she said, stretching out the word political as if it were a taunt. The word hung in the air, dripping with mockery. Avery's tone was thick with judgment, like she was savoring the sting she had just delivered. Jasmine felt the sharpness of the insult deep in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had faced much worse, harsher attacks, but this felt personal. It wasn't just about politics. It was about something deeper, something that struck far too close to home. "Yes, I am Jasmine Crockett, and I have a confirmed reservation. Can you please check again?" she demanded, her voice now firm and unwavering. Avery's smile widened ever so slightly, though it was anything but warm. She didn't bother looking up. "Our system doesn't show any reservations under your name. There might be a mistake," she said, dismissing Jasmine's presence as though it were insignificant. But the words that followed made Jasmine's blood run cold. "We do prioritize guests who have more open-minded views," Avery added, the phrase dripping with disdain as if open-minded were a term that didn't apply to someone like Jasmine. Jasmine blinked, momentarily stunned. "Open-minded?" she repeated, her voice low, colder now. "Are you saying I'm not open-minded enough to stay here?" Avery didn't miss a beat, her grin remaining in place, her eyes never meeting Jasmine's. "I didn't say that," she replied, but the tone of her voice made it clear she didn't need to. "We have certain standards here. Not everyone fits the atmosphere," she added with a dismissive shrug. The words hit Jasmine like a slap to the face. It wasn't just a system error. It wasn't even about politics. It was a deep-seated, unspoken bias. A message loud and clear that someone like her wasn't welcome. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the emotions threatening to spill over. "This is discrimination," Jasmine said, her voice sharp and commanding now, no longer holding the polite facade she had kept until then. "And I will not stand for it." The tension in the air grew thick as Jasmine locked eyes with Avery, unwilling to back down. This moment wasn't just about checking into a hotel. It was a battle for respect, for dignity, and Jasmine wasn't about to lose. Jasmine stood there, surrounded by the grandeur of the Riccio Grand, but inside, a growing unease gnawed at her. She had come here hoping to find rest, a brief escape from the pressures of her daily life. Yet now it felt as though she had stepped into a trap, trapped in a situation she couldn't easily escape. Avery's gaze felt like a sharp knife constantly directed at her, full of contempt and mockery. Jasmine could sense it clearly now. This front desk employee wasn't just refusing her service. She was expressing deep disdain, not just for who Jasmine was, but for what she represented. It was clear to Jasmine that her political views were the only reason for the hostility she was now facing. She had never been treated this way before, especially not in a luxurious hotel like the Riccio Grand. Jasmine hadn't openly declared her political stance to anyone here, but Avery had already recognized her. The way she looked at her, the way she spoke, it all spoke volumes. This wasn't a simple case of refusal. This was a challenge to the very values Jasmine stood for, values she had defended time and time again, despite the many criticisms and attacks she faced. Then, as Jasmine glanced around the room, she realized it wasn't just Avery who was treating her this way. The cold stares from the guests around her were unmistakable. A few people looked her over with judgment in their eyes. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. They were silently evaluating her, silently agreeing with the attitude Avery had displayed. A middle-aged man at the bar looked her over with a shake of his head, as if displeased by her mere presence. A woman with long curly hair and an expensive outfit turned to glance at her, eyes cold and unfeeling, before she casually turned away, dismissing her entirely. These looks, this silent condemnation, was something Jasmine couldn't escape. The discrimination wasn't just coming from Avery. It was now a shared attitude in the very place that was supposed to welcome her. The sting of humiliation began to rise in Jasmine. She stood there, feeling the weight of the cold stares and hushed whispers behind her. It wasn't just about being denied service anymore. It was about being humiliated in the very place she had hoped to find solace. A luxury hotel where every guest was supposed to be treated with dignity and respect. But what hurt the most wasn't just Avery's behavior. It was the complicity of those around her. No one spoke up. No one stepped in to defend her. They all just stood there in silence, watching as though this discrimination was a natural thing, an inevitability. Their silence was an unspoken agreement, and it made the injustice even more unbearable. None of them were brave enough to stand against what was happening. No one was willing to challenge the wrongdoing they were witnessing. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, to keep her emotions from overtaking her. But part of her could not tolerate this discrimination. What Avery and the others were doing wasn't just about rejecting a customer. It was about publicly exposing the discrimination, the denial of rights, all because of her political views. A surge of indignation washed over her. But instead of allowing it to consume her, Jasmine made a choice. She wasn't going to let this discrimination defeat her. She looked Avery straight in the eye, no longer the calm, composed woman she had been at the start. Now every word she spoke felt like a challenge, a demand for respect. We don't have to agree on everything, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve to be treated with the same respect as any other guest here. For a moment, Avery's gaze faltered. She hesitated just long enough for Jasmine to see the uncertainty in her eyes. But Avery quickly regained her composure, forcing her usual coldness back into place. Jasmine knew, though, that she had stepped into a battle she wasn't going to win easily. She couldn't allow herself to be crushed under the weight of these prejudices, these biases. Jasmine turned away, feeling the sting of humiliation settle in her chest, but she refused to let it weaken her. She wasn't going to walk away easily. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She wouldn't let anyone at all, take away her rights and dignity simply because of her political views. Jasmine stood frozen, her hand tightly gripping the handle of her suitcase, a rising wave of shame flooding her chest as she realized she no longer felt like a typical guest at the Riccio Grand. She stood amidst luxury, surrounded by ancient paintings and the twinkling light of crystal chandeliers, but her heart felt cold and empty. While everything around her still radiated beauty and power, Jasmine couldn't escape the overwhelming feeling of being rejected and diminished, all because of the political views she represented. Her sense of self-worth began to fracture as the eyes of those around her continued to linger on her, filled with suspicion and disdain. Each step she took, every echo of her footsteps in the hotel lobby, felt heavier, as if everyone were watching, judging her. In their eyes, she wasn't just a person. They saw her as a symbol of opinions they despised, an object to be ignored, cast out from this space, merely because of her differences. Avery, The young woman behind the front desk continued to maintain her cold indifference. She refused to meet Jasmine's gaze, instead fiddling with her computer screen, occasionally glancing in Jasmine's direction in a detached manner, as if the very idea of acknowledging Jasmine was beneath her. Each time Avery's eyes flicked toward her, Jasmine felt the sting of insult, the contempt, as if Avery were announcing that Jasmine didn't deserve the courtesy of her attention. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. She couldn't understand why such discrimination existed in a professional environment, a place where people were supposed to be treated with fairness and respect. She wasn't just being denied service. The rejection was blatant, as if she had no right to stand in this hotel simply because of her political beliefs. As each minute passed, Jasmine felt herself being lowered even further. The tension inside her began to settle deep in her bones, an annoying pressure she couldn't shake. In this moment, she realized she wasn't just a guest in a hotel. She was a target of discrimination, a person oppressed simply because of what she believed in. This wasn't a simple act of rejection. It was a message, a clear declaration that people like her didn't belong in spaces like this. The other guests in the lobby began to take notice of the silent standoff between Jasmine and Avery. They didn't speak, but their eyes said it all. A few people turned away, avoiding the confrontation, while others glanced at Jasmine, not out of politeness, but because they could sense the tension in the air. No one intervened. No one stood up to defend her. The silence only made Jasmine feel more isolated and uncomfortable. She could hear the soft murmurs and laughter of the other guests, but all those sounds seemed distant, fading into the background. The only thing she could focus on was the pounding of her heart, echoing in her chest. She no longer felt like she was part of this space. The feeling of being ostracized for what she represented twisted deep within her. It felt as though she were standing before an invisible wall, a wall of discrimination that only she had to face, while everyone around her remained indifferent, as if nothing was happening. Jasmine gritted her teeth, the injustice rising inside her. Every time she tried to react, every time she stood up for herself, something seemed to hold her back. But she was determined not to let herself be defeated. She knew that if she didn't stand up right now, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been pushed aside, then she and people like her would continue to be looked down upon forever, relegated to the margins of society. The tension between Jasmine and Avery was becoming palpable, as if the air around them had thickened with the weight of each passing second. Jasmine could feel the challenge in every word Avery spat at her. This wasn't just about a refusal to serve. Avery's words felt like daggers aimed directly at Jasmine's core. Every sentence was a calculated strike against her dignity, against everything she stood for. Avery wasn't just discriminating against Jasmine in a private corner of the hotel. She was mocking her in front of everyone, as if Jasmine didn't even deserve to stand in the very space that was supposed to welcome her. Avery's eyes roamed over Jasmine, taking her in from head to toe before flashing a thin, almost amused smile, as though she found the whole situation a source of entertainment. "You know, I just can't seem to wrap my head around this," Avery said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're a political figure with a loud voice, yet you don't seem to grasp the concept of harmony or open-mindedness. Do you see that?" Avery gestured broadly to the room. Her smirk widening, Avery added, "Everyone here is sighing in relief that they don't have to tolerate people like you stepping into this space." Jasmine stood frozen, her heart sinking as Avery's words struck her like a relentless storm. Each syllable felt like a blow to her self-worth. She could feel the humiliation rising within her, like a tidal wave crashing over her, but she fought to keep control. Despite the surge of anger threatening to erupt, Jasmine kept her posture steady, her breathing slow and deliberate. Avery wasn't just refusing her service. She was publicly humiliating her, treating her as though she didn't belong in this hotel, as if her presence was a disruption, an unwelcome anomaly. Jasmine's chest tightened as the words sank in. She had been in politics long enough to face hostile opinions, to endure public backlash for her views. But this was different. This wasn't just about politics. It was about being stripped of her dignity, being reduced to nothing more than a symbol of everything Avery despised. And what stung the most was the way Avery said it, as if Jasmine were a burden, an inconvenience unworthy of respect, unworthy of being a guest in this hotel. Avery continued, her voice growing colder, more biting with every word. "Maybe I should warn the other guests here about you," she said, her tone dripping with malice. "I'm sure they wouldn't want to hear your narrow-minded views during their stay. Honestly, if I were you, I'd leave before you make everyone uncomfortable." Jasmine's blood ran cold at the venom in Avery's voice, but inside, a surge of anger coursed through her. She could feel it, the injustice of the situation, the raw, sharp sting of being belittled. Avery wasn't just making a rude comment. She was trying to strip Jasmine of her sense of worth, trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. But Jasmine couldn't and wouldn't let that happen. Her eyes locked onto Avery's, filled with an intensity that burned like fire. Jasmine's fists clenched at her sides, the heat of her anger mingling with the cold reality of the moment. Every part of her screamed to retaliate, to unleash the fury building up inside her. But Jasmine knew better than to let her emotions control her. She wasn't going to let Avery see her break. Jasmine took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Her voice was sharp and unwavering as she responded, "What do you want, Avery?" Her words were measured, but every syllable was filled with the weight of her resolve. "You think you can degrade me like this and not face consequences?" Avery's smirk never faltered. "I don't need to do anything," she replied with arrogance, her eyes still not fully meeting Jasmine's. "I'm just doing my job here." Her smile grew more mocking as she added, "And as for you, if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have no choice but to call management. I'm sure you wouldn't want to be escorted out of here, would you?" The audacity in Avery's words was enough to push Jasmine to the edge. Anger burned inside her, but instead of unleashing it, she gathered her strength. She wasn't going to let Avery win. Not today. Jasmine had been knocked down too many times in her life, but she had always risen. She wasn't about to let this be the moment that broke her. Jasmine stared at Avery, her gaze fierce and unwavering. She could feel the stares of the other guests burning into her, the silence from those around her amplifying the cruelty of the situation. Every inch of her being screamed to defend herself, to confront the injustice head-on. But Jasmine knew this battle wasn't just about her. It was about standing tall, about holding on to her dignity and demanding respect. Not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been pushed aside or dismissed because of who they were or what they believed. The tension in the air thickened as Jasmine turned to leave. Each step she took felt heavier, but it wasn't the weight of defeat pressing down on her. It was the determination that surged through her. She wasn't going to let this be the end of her story here. This wasn't over. As she walked away, she promised herself that she wouldn't let Avery or anyone like her have the final say. This was just the beginning of a much bigger fight, and Jasmine was ready. The sting of insult and injustice still lingered within her as she walked away from the front desk, her steps resolute, her mind steeled. She had come to Riccio Grand with the hope of finding respite from the chaos of her life. But now, she found herself in the midst of something far more personal and far more dangerous. Something that demanded action. Jasmine couldn't let this slide. She couldn't walk away without confronting Avery and making sure the wrongs done to her were corrected. It wasn't just about the disrespect she had faced. It was about standing up for herself, for her values, and for the dignity that had been so cruelly stripped away. She stood, facing the grandeur of the Riccio Grand, its elegant fixtures and opulent furnishings all seemingly mocking her as her thoughts swirled. The hotel no longer seemed like a refuge, felt like a battleground. She couldn't allow herself to be humiliated in silence, not when there was a clear injustice staring her in the face. Avery's behavior was a blatant attack, and Jasmine would not stand idly by. With a sharp gaze and hands trembling with barely contained anger, Jasmine pulled out her phone from her pocket, the screen illuminated in her hand. And for a moment, she hesitated, anxiety and determination coiling inside her. She knew what had to be done. She needed backup. The only person Jasmine trusted in moments like these was Josh, her longtime assistant, who had been by her side through countless high-stakes situations. From the pressures of the White House to the political fires she had constantly navigated, Josh knew her better than anyone and understood how to handle her needs in the most demanding of moments. Jasmine pressed his number, her fingers slightly unsteady as she tapped the screen. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The knot in her stomach tightened with nervous anticipation. She was angry, but more than that, she was anxious. Could Josh help her? Would he be able to access what she needed before it was too late? Re. The phone rang on the other end, each ring echoing in her chest like the beat of her own racing heart. Her breath caught in her throat, her mind racing with thoughts of the situation and the injustice she was facing. She wanted to remain calm, but the frustration was almost too much to bear. Finally, Josh picked up. "Jasmine." His voice came through the line, calm and steady as always, but even through the coolness of his tone, she could hear the concern, the subtle tension. He knew something was wrong. "Josh, I need your help right now," Jasmine said quickly, her voice tight with urgency yet firm. She was determined, but the intensity of the moment was clear in every word she spoke. "I'm at Riccio Grand. There's a big issue here, and I need you to do something for me." "What's going on? Is this about the hotel?" Josh's voice crackled with a sharp edge of concern, clearly sensing the gravity of the situation. "Yes," Jasmine replied, her voice laced with frustration. "Avery, the front desk employee here, has refused to serve me for reasons completely unacceptable." She bit out the words, each one sharp with the sting of discrimination. "She didn't just refuse to serve me, Josh. She insulted me and discriminated against me because of the political views I represent. I need you to get into their system right now and find proof that she altered my reservation details. She's tampered with my booking deliberately, and I need concrete evidence of it." Josh didn't hesitate. "Got it, Jasmine. I'll get on it right away. Anything else?" Jasmine paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Her hands were still shaking, but she refused to let it show. "I need you to dig into all the system records, email confirmations, any changes in their database. She deleted my reservation on purpose. I want clear, irrefutable proof, no mistakes, so we can expose this for what it is." "I'm accessing the system now," Josh replied quickly. "But you need to prepare yourself. This could take a little time." "It's fine," Jasmine responded, a flash of impatience running through her voice. "Just get it done as fast as possible. I can't let this slide without consequences." The phone line went silent as Josh hung up, and Jasmine felt a mixture of relief and anxiety flood over her. She couldn't stop thinking about the potential consequences if things didn't go according to plan. Would Josh be able to find the evidence she needed? Would she truly be able to turn the tables? Or would she have to face defeat with nothing but the lingering sting of injustice? Jasmine could hear the low hum of conversations from other guests in the lobby. Their eyes followed her movements, curiosity mixed with judgment, but she no longer cared. They weren't her concern, not now. What mattered was proving that the discrimination and humiliation she had suffered weren't something she was willing to accept quietly. She couldn't allow herself to be further pushed into the margins. She would make sure of it. But in the back of her mind, a deeper worry gnawed at her. Would the people around her continue to protect Avery with their silence, just as they had done before? Or would the truth finally come to light? Would the world see the injustice she faced? Or would she remain alone, fighting an invisible battle? A strange sense of unease gripped Jasmine, but she didn't let it control her. She couldn't predict what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't about to let Avery or anyone else diminish her without facing consequences. Standing tall, Jasmine looked at the phone still glowing in her hand. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for had led to this moment. She wasn't going to let it slip away. No, this wouldn't end here. Jasmine stood still, her hands clenched tightly around her phone, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. A storm of emotions swirled inside her, each one more intense than the last. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but she refused to let it break her. Every second seemed to stretch into eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension that gripped her body. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the flood of emotions raging within her. But she knew that everything could change with just one moment, one message from Josh. In that moment, hope and power would surge back into her life. The suffocating silence in the air was suddenly broken by the familiar ping of a new message. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she quickly unlocked her phone, her hands slightly unsteady as she read the text that had the power to shift everything. "Jasmine, I found everything you need. You were right. Avery deliberately deleted your reservation. She altered all the data related to your booking at 5:18 p.m., right after finding your name in the system. I've got full access to the hotel's records, and this was no accident. She did this on purpose. What do you want me to do next?" Jasmine froze, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't believe her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the proof she needed to expose Avery for what she had done. The feeling of injustice that had been gnawing at her finally began to fade, replaced by a sense of vindication and empowerment. The evidence was real, undeniable, and it would be her weapon to fight back. For a brief moment, Jasmine stood still, absorbing the weight of what this meant. The sting of humiliation and anger that had plagued her since the moment she walked into the hotel now had a way out. She had the truth in her hands, and the tables were about to turn. Avery had thought she could get away with her actions, but now the power had shifted. Jasmine was no longer the victim. She was the one in control. She could feel the change in the atmosphere around her, the tension in the air. The oppressive weight of the injustice was slowly lifting. It was as if the entire space around her had shifted. Jasmine stood taller, her posture strong. She had the evidence she needed, and Avery was about to be exposed. She was ready to take back her power. With a sense of clarity and determination, Jasmine quickly typed a response to Josh. "Thank you, Josh. This is exactly what I needed. I won't let this go without consequences. Send me everything you have, every document, every detail about the deletion of the reservation. I'm going to confront Avery, and I'm going to make sure she faces the consequences of her actions." As soon as she hit send, Jasmine slipped her phone into her pocket. Her fingers were now steady, her mind laser-focused. Her heart was still racing, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the anticipation of the battle she was about to wage. Every step towards the front desk felt like a march toward justice. She wasn't just walking through the hotel anymore. She was walking toward the truth, toward a reckoning. Avery would not escape this. Jasmine's every step on the marble floor rang out like a declaration of war against the discrimination she had endured. She stood before the front desk, her body still, but her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Every moment, every decision had led her here, to this exact point where there was no turning back. The moment she had been preparing for had arrived, and Jasmine wasn't about to let fear or doubt hold her back now. Her eyes, sharp and intense, were fixed on Avery, and her hand gripped her purse with such force that her knuckles were white. All the nervous energy, the anxiety she had felt earlier, had evaporated, replaced by an ironclad resolve. Avery was still behind the desk, her posture arrogant and self-assured, as she continued to assume control over the situation. But Jasmine could see the slightest shift in Avery's demeanor. The smugness in her gaze faltered just a fraction as she noticed Jasmine walking toward her, each step radiating determination. A subtle tension began to build as Avery's confidence started to crack. As Jasmine approached the counter, she could see that Avery's composure was slipping. The cool, indifferent facade was starting to break down, replaced by a flicker of surprise. Avery couldn't quite grasp why Jasmine was so resolute in her confrontation, why she refused to simply back down. But Jasmine wasn't here to cower. She stepped up to Avery, standing tall and unflinching, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "What are you doing, Avery?" Jasmine asked, her voice cold but resolute. "Why did you delete my reservation? Who do you think you are deciding to do that?" Avery looked startled for a brief second before quickly regaining her composure, trying to mask her discomfort with an air of arrogance. What are you talking about?" she stammered, though there was still a hint of superiority in her tone. "I didn't do anything. It must have been a system error, not my fault." Jasmine didn't let her off that easily. An error? You're telling me that the system just happened to delete my reservation after you found out who I was? You knew exactly who I am, and you deliberately did this, didn't you? Jasmine's words hit like a blow, and the rising sense of outrage bubbled to the surface. She couldn't believe she was being treated like this. Avery hadn't just refused her service. She had intentionally removed her from the system, not for any legitimate reason, but because of the political views Jasmine represented. It was a personal attack, and Jasmine wasn't going to let it slide. Avery's confident mask began to slip, and Jasmine could see the guilt starting to show in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying her internal panic as she tried to regain her footing. But Jasmine already knew the truth. It was too clear now. Avery had done exactly what she had intended to do, and she wasn't sorry for it. You know exactly what you did? Jasmine continued, her voice full of frustration and anger. And I'm not here to listen to your excuses. I want you to explain why you deleted my information. Do you think you can just avoid responsibility for this? The silence between them stretched thick with tension. Jasmine could feel the weight of every eye in the lobby on them, watching as the confrontation escalated. But Jasmine wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't the victim. She was standing tall, demanding the respect she deserved. Avery finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with an odd mix of defiance and fear. You don't understand, Jasmine, Avery spat. This is our hotel. We have the right to decide who stays and who doesn't. You don't belong here. You're not worthy of this place. Jasmine's fury reached its peak, and she took a step forward, closing the gap between them. Her gaze never left Avery's, now filled with a determination that left no room for doubt. She wasn't just asking for an apology anymore. She wasn't going to let Avery's actions go unpunished. You're wrong, Jasmine said, her voice steady and unwavering. And I'm not going to let you keep humiliating me like this. You will face the consequences for what you've done. With those words, Jasmine turned her back on Avery, walking away from the front desk with a purposeful stride. Each step felt like a victory, a final declaration that she would not back down. Avery had tried to break her to make her feel small, but Jasmine was stronger than that. She would face the consequences not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been silenced, cast aside, or treated as less than they were worth. As Jasmine made her way out of the lobby, the weight of the moment lifted off her shoulders. The nervous energy that had once gripped her was now gone, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that she had stood up for herself. Avery would have to answer for her actions, and Jasmine wouldn't let her get away with it. This was just the beginning. Jasmine stood there, her hands clenched tightly, her gaze fixed on Avery with an intensity that felt like a storm building. She had everything she needed, irrefutable proof from the hotel system and the humiliation Avery had caused, which was undeniable. But as she faced Avery, Jasmine saw no sign of remorse. Instead, Avery's defiance and challenging attitude remained unshaken. Avery didn't appear apologetic at all. In fact, she took a step back, trying to create a weak shield of justification for her actions. You really think I'm going to accept this, Jasmine? Avery asked, her voice cold. But Jasmine could see the slightest flicker of hesitation in her eyes. You see, Jasmine, Avery continued, her face shifting slightly, trying to maintain her self-assurance. We just don't want someone with your views here. This is our hotel, and we have the right to protect this space from people with outdated opinions. Avery raised her hand as if to justify the discrimination she had carried out. Not everyone can be here without disrupting the atmosphere we've created. Jasmine's disbelief surged within her. The audacity of Avery to keep denying the blatant discrimination she had displayed only deepened the insult. Each word Avery spoke was like another blow to Jasmine's dignity. The respect Jasmine deserved was being stripped away, piece by piece. You can't just deny the truth like that, Avery, Jasmine interjected, her voice firm and challenging. I have proof from the hotel system, and you can't justify deleting my reservation. You did this on purpose, and now you want to keep justifying this discrimination. Avery's brow furrowed, her expression tightening. She tried to step back slightly, but the tension in her face grew. Jasmine could see that she was struggling to maintain control of the situation, but it was slipping. The facade was cracking. "I'm not discriminating against anyone," Avery said, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "I'm just following the hotel's protocol. The system decided, and there was nothing I could do." Jasmine took a step closer, her frustration growing. Avery's feeble attempts to sidestep responsibility only made the injustice sting even more. Jasmine couldn't let Avery escape the truth. She couldn't let her continue to hide behind lies and excuses. "Don't pretend like you're the victim here," Jasmine said coldly, her voice ice. "You know exactly what you did. You deleted my reservation on purpose because my political views don't align with yours. That's discrimination, Avery, and you're trying to avoid responsibility." Avery's confident smirk faltered, and Jasmine saw her swallow hard. Her hands trembled as if she were searching for an excuse to justify her actions, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, Avery managed a forced, sneering smile. "I'm just doing my job," she said, but her words had lost their bite. "You don't understand. You don't belong here. This place is for open-minded people." The weight of the insult grew heavier in Jasmine's chest. She was no longer talking to a person. She was confronting a system of bigotry and arrogance, and every word Avery spoke added fuel to the fire of Jasmine's anger. She wasn't going to let this continue any longer. "So you're saying I don't have a right to be here just because I don't agree with you, right?" Jasmine asked, her voice now dripping with disbelief and fury. "You think you have the right to decide who deserves to be here and who doesn't? You're using your position to discriminate and humiliate people like me." Avery fell silent, her gaze dropping to the desk. The self-assurance in her eyes had vanished, replaced by discomfort. She was no longer looking Jasmine in the eye, trying to avoid the confrontation she had started. But Jasmine wasn't going to let her escape. "You can't deny the truth, Avery," Jasmine said, her voice as cold as ice. "You're going to face the consequences for what you've done." The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine stood there, unwavering, while the tension in the air continued to build. Every word from Avery had exposed her arrogance, and each excuse she made to hide the truth only made the injustice even more apparent. Jasmine wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or belittled. As the confrontation between Jasmine and Avery reached a boiling point, Jasmine stood before the front desk, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The air felt thick with tension. Each word exchanged between her and Avery cut deeper than the last. Jasmine could feel the storm of emotions building inside her. The frustration, the anger, the need to take a stand. She had reached her breaking point. This was no longer about being humiliated or seeking an apology. It was about justice, about proving that her dignity couldn't be stripped away so easily. She was determined to end this right now. Just as the standoff seemed ready to escalate further, the door behind the front desk creaked open, and a man stepped out, his presence commanding immediate attention. Nicholas, Jasmine's older brother, entered the lobby with the air of someone who held the power of the world in his hands. Every movement he made exuded authority and confidence. The simple fact that he was there changed everything. The room seemed to pause for a moment as everyone took notice of the man who had the ability to shift the situation with just a single word. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she saw him enter. Her brother, always a strong and unyielding force in her life, was here. He was more than just her sibling. He was the owner of Riccio Grand, the man who had built the hotel and worked tirelessly to ensure its success. Jasmine felt a rush of both relief and apprehension. Though she knew Nicholas would always have her back, the power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't just her brother in this moment. He was the one who could make things happen. She had faith in him, but she couldn't help the wave of nervousness that washed over her. Would he be able to handle the situation with the same level of decisiveness he was known for? As Nicholas stepped further into the light of the lobby, his sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Jasmine for a brief moment. Then, without skipping a beat, his gaze moved to Avery. There was no sign of surprise, no acknowledgement of the tension. He was here to handle business. Jasmine could see the moment Avery's self-assurance began to crack. The aura of power that Nicholas radiated was impossible to ignore, and Avery couldn't help but shrink under the weight of his presence. Nicholas didn't hesitate. His steps were deliberate as he walked toward the front desk, his eyes never leaving Avery. The energy in the room shifted again. Avery, who had been so confident moments before, now faltered slightly. She didn't know what to expect from the man who had built the very hotel she worked at. The realization that she was now under the watchful eye of the hotel's owner was too much to ignore. "Jasmine," Nicholas said, his voice low but filled with authority. His gaze then turned to Avery, his tone turning cold and filled with a commanding presence that made the very air around them feel heavier. "What's going on here?" Avery instinctively took a step back, her earlier confidence evaporating as she felt the full weight of Nicholas's gaze. She opened her mouth, but her words caught in her throat. Her voice trembled as she tried to defend herself. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Nicholas. I didn't do anything wrong." Jasmine couldn't let Avery continue down the path of lies and excuses. She wasn't going to let her get away with it. "Nothing wrong," Jasmine cut in, her voice sharp as steel. "You deliberately deleted my reservation because I don't share your views. I have proof, and I want you to explain why you did this." Nicholas's eyes, once sharp and cold, now narrowed as he focused entirely on Avery. Jasmine could feel the tension escalate even further. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a moment that would define the rest of the evening. Nicholas wasn't just the owner of Riccio Grand. He was about to set the course of justice into motion, and Jasmine could only stand there, holding her breath as she awaited his response. Avery stammered, desperately trying to maintain the composure that was slipping from her by the second. No, it was a system error. I didn't mean to." Nicholas interrupted her, his voice devoid of mercy. "A system error? You knew exactly who you were dealing with, and you chose to delete her reservation. Jasmine is one of our guests, and if you continue trying to justify your actions, I won't let you get away with it." The entire lobby fell silent as the weight of Nicholas's words sank in. Jasmine could feel her pulse racing in her chest. But it wasn't fear. It was a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing her brother was here to support her. She wasn't alone. Avery was now facing the man who could make all of this disappear with a single word, and Jasmine could feel the moment of justice inching closer. Nicholas turned back to Jasmine, his gaze softening just a touch as he studied her face, seeing the resolve in her eyes. He wasn't here just to make things right for her. He was here to make sure Avery would face the consequences of her actions. "This won't be an easy fix, Jasmine," he said quietly, his voice filled with unwavering confidence. "But Avery will face the consequences of what she's done, and I won't allow anyone to misuse their power in this hotel." Jasmine felt a surge of pride and relief flood through her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the power of justice would rise, and Avery would have to answer for her actions. Nicholas had her back, and he wasn't about to let this injustice slide. Avery's confidence had completely crumbled by now. She could no longer mask the guilt that was written all over her face. Her hands trembled slightly, as if she were trying to regain some semblance of control. But it was too late. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. "You'll have to face the consequences of your actions, Avery," Nicholas said, his voice now filled with cold finality. "And I promise you this. If you've abused your position here, you won't be working for Riccio Grand any longer." The room was charged with tension. As Jasmine watched Avery's composure crumble, she realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about ensuring everyone in the hotel was treated with the respect they deserved, regardless of their political views. This was the moment when the truth came to the surface, and there was no more room for hiding. Jasmine stood tall, her head held high. The storm that had raged within her moments before had passed, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and justice. Avery would face the consequences of her actions, and Jasmine would no longer be the victim. This was her victory, and it was one she had fought for with every ounce of strength she had. Nicholas's presence had shifted the balance, and now it was time for Avery to pay the price for her actions. Jasmine's confidence had returned, and the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders, knowing that justice was finally on her side. The atmosphere in Rio Grande grew increasingly tense as Nicholas stood face to face with Avery. It was as if time itself had slowed down, and all that could be heard was the steady breathing of both Jasmine and Avery echoing in the otherwise silent space. The onlookers in the lobby stood frozen, holding their breaths, their eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Everyone knew that what was happening now wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was a moment that would alter not only the hotel's future but the lives of everyone involved. Nicholas didn't hesitate for a second. Without a flicker of doubt, he locked eyes with Avery, his gaze cold and unwavering. For a moment, the silence lingered, heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Then he made his decision. No more words, no more explanations. He was about to deliver the verdict. "You are not just an employee of Rio Grande," Nicholas began, his voice calm but brimming with authority. "You are part of a team we've built on values of fairness and respect for all guests. But what you've done today is unforgivable." Avery stood there, her face draining of color as she looked up at Nicholas. She could no longer hold on to her arrogance. She searched for an escape, for some justification to offer, but her confidence had evaporated. The reality of the situation hit her hard. She could no longer deny what she had done. Panic flickered across her face as the weight of her actions sank in. I didn't mean to. Avery stammered, her hands trembling as she reached for an excuse, but nothing came. Nicholas didn't allow her to continue. "There's nothing left to explain," he said, his voice now cutting through the tension. "Your actions are clear. You used your position to discriminate and refuse service to a guest simply because of a difference in political views. That is unacceptable in a place like Rio Grande." His voice dropped even lower, but the power behind every word made Avery flinch. "You're fired. Effective immediately." The lobby fell silent. Time seemed to freeze as the weight of Nicholas's words sank in. The onlookers exchanged looks, their eyes darting from Avery's now pale face to the severity of Nicholas's expression. The impact of the decision was undeniable, and Avery knew it. Her fate had been sealed. Jasmine felt a sense of relief and satisfaction welling up inside her. But she also felt something deeper, something more fulfilling. This wasn't just a personal victory. This was justice being served. Avery's hands shook, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She stared at Nicholas, unable to believe that her fate had been decided in an instant. The power of the moment was too overwhelming for her to handle, and panic was written all over her face. She had no choice now but to accept the consequences of her actions. Jasmine stood still, watching as Avery crumbled under the weight of her brother's decision. Every step Avery took away from the front desk, her face pale with fear and humiliation, only served to affirm the correctness of what had just transpired. Jasmine had been humiliated, targeted, and wronged. But in this moment, she wasn't just reclaiming her own dignity. She was ensuring that no one else would face the same fate. This wasn't just about one person's downfall. This was a message that would resonate throughout the hotel and beyond. Nicholas turned to Jasmine, his eyes softening just slightly. There was no sign of regret, no indication that he had second thoughts. He had made the right call. "You were right," he said, his voice warm with respect. "No one should ever use their power to discriminate or insult others." Jasmine felt a surge of gratitude as she met her brother's gaze. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for everything she stood for: justice, equality, and respect for others. This was more than a confrontation with Avery. It was a stand for something greater. The message was clear. Those who abuse their power to belittle or harm others would not go unpunished. Avery, her face streaked with tears, slowly turned and walked away. Her head was bowed in shame, but there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. The silence in the lobby was deafening. But then a few guests began to quietly applaud, showing their support for the decision Nicholas had made. Some even nodded in agreement, recognizing that the right thing had been done. Jasmine felt a swell of pride in her chest. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had been wronged by those in power. It was a reminder that justice would always prevail, that those who sought to divide or humiliate would be held accountable. As Avery disappeared from sight, Jasmine's heart calmed, but the adrenaline of the moment still coursed through her. Nicholas had proven that no one, no matter their position, was above accountability. He had chosen the right path, the path of righteousness, and in doing so had sent a powerful message that would not be forgotten. Jasmine would never again allow herself to be silenced or treated as less than she was worth. And from that day forward, Avery would understand the cost of her actions. Immediately after Avery's dismissal, the incident spread like wildfire across social media, sparking a storm of controversy. Within hours, videos capturing the critical moment of Nicholas's decision to fire Avery and the intense confrontation between Jasmine and Avery were being shared at an unprecedented rate. Status updates, articles, and comments flooded online platforms, quickly dividing people into two sharply contrasting camps. Jasmine felt a rush of emotions as she watched each new notification, each fresh comment appear on her phone screen. She knew that her confrontation with Avery was merely the surface of a much deeper issue. The real battle was no longer just with one individual. It was against a vast, systemic injustice that extended far beyond the hotel's walls. She was no longer facing just one person. She was challenging a system that enabled discrimination, protected the powerful, and silenced those who dared to speak out. The reactions from the online community were immediate. Supporters of Jasmine rallied behind her, praising her as a champion of justice, a hero who had stood up against discrimination and societal division. They shared her posts, reshared the videos, and the hashtag Justice for Jasmine quickly began trending across multiple social media platforms. Finally, we have someone brave enough to stand up against racism and the abuse of power. Jasmine is the role model we all need for fighting for justice, no matter the threats. One post read. However, there was an equally vocal backlash from those who disagreed with Jasmine's actions. Critics condemned her for abusing her power, accusing her of turning a personal matter into a political spectacle. These individuals saw Avery's firing as an attack on free speech, a violation of Avery's privacy, since she had simply been doing her job. We're living in an era where those in power can easily crush anyone with differing opinions. Avery was just doing her job and got blacklisted because of politics. This is an unacceptable abuse of power, read a comment from an influential account in the community. Jasmine felt the knot of anxiety tighten in her chest as she read these comments. She hadn't anticipated that standing up for justice would not only bring her praise but also such fierce criticism. The weight of the backlash was heavy, and she could feel the unease creeping in. She wasn't just up against Avery and the like-minded conservatives who supported her. Now, she was facing a massive societal structure, powerful forces trying to tear her down. Jasmine understood that this fight was not merely about Avery. She was fighting for her own rights, for the rights of those who had been wronged. But she also realized that this system was designed to protect people like Avery, those who could wield power without facing consequences. It was a troubling revelation, one that made the battle feel even more monumental. Every comment, every share on social media, intensified the situation. Jasmine couldn't look away from the screen. The digital battleground had become just as critical as the physical one, and she was entrenched in a struggle not just over racism, but about power, societal norms, and justice. It felt like the stakes had grown higher with every new post. A single question echoed in her mind over and over again. Could she win this fight? Could she face a society that was condemning and scrutinizing her every move? Could she hold her ground in the face of such intense opposition? Every time her phone buzzed with another notification, every time she saw a post criticizing her, Jasmine felt the weight of justice growing heavier. The reactions from the online community made her realize that this battle was not hers alone. It was a fight for everyone who believed in justice, fairness, and equality. This was a larger struggle that transcended her personal grievances. Jasmine was not alone in this fight, and her determination grew with the knowledge that her actions were being seen, debated, and supported by a wider audience. But at the same time, the growing tension in the community reminded her that the fight for justice was never easy. She wasn't just up against an individual or a single unjust act, but a larger system that would make every step toward fairness and truth more difficult. The weight of that realization was a heavy burden, but Jasmine knew she could not back down. She had started this fight for justice, and now she would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. This was no longer just about Avery or the incident at Riccio Grande. It was about something much bigger. The online reactions, both supportive and critical, proved that this was a moment with far-reaching consequences. Jasmine was becoming a symbol of resistance for many, a voice in the fight for justice. But as the debate raged on online, Jasmine understood that the true battle had only just begun. The overwhelming tension and excitement from the mixed reactions on social media didn't faze Jasmine. If anything, it only strengthened her resolve. She felt the urgency of having her voice heard, and despite the criticism and the isolation that came with standing up for what was right, Jasmine knew that silence would not get her the justice she sought. What was most important now was sharing her message about discrimination, the abuse of power, and justice, not just for herself, but for all those who were oppressed. With unwavering determination, Jasmine opened her phone, tapped into her social media app, and began typing. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, each word and sentence carefully crafted, filled with meaning and passion. She wasn't just responding to the comments or attempting to defend herself. No, this was something bigger. She was making a statement to everyone who had been following the story, to all those who had witnessed the injustice unfold. She wrote, "Throughout my life, I have seen discrimination, the abuse of power by those who think they have the right to hurt others simply because of differences. Today, I stand up not just for myself, but for all those who have been oppressed, insulted, and belittled by society. I cannot remain silent while people like Avery use their power to suppress those who don't look like them or think like them. This is not just wrong. It is a violation of every person's right to live freely and be treated equally." Jasmine paused for a moment, staring at the screen. Her eyes were filled with conviction, and there was no sign of doubt or fear. She continued, "We cannot allow people like Avery to see us as weak simply because we don't agree with them. This time, I stand up not just for myself, but for all those who have suffered from discrimination. Justice is not something we can wait for. We must fight for it, for all those who have been pushed to the margins of society." Jasmine stared at the words she had just written, her heart swelling with emotion. She knew this wasn't just a personal fight for justice. It was about standing up for those who had been hurt by a system meant to uphold equality but instead perpetuated discrimination. This was a fight for justice, for equality, and for human rights. Jasmine was determined to lead that charge. She understood that her message wouldn't be welcomed by everyone. Some would view it as a personal vendetta or an overreaction. But for Jasmine, remaining silent would only allow the cycle of discrimination and inequality to continue. Every word she typed was a declaration of war against injustice. It was a call for those like her to rise up and fight for what was right. This wasn't a personal victory. It was a triumph for freedom, fairness, and courage. She pressed post. Immediately, Jasmine's message drew attention. Comments began flooding in at an overwhelming rate. Many people expressed strong support for her, calling her a defender of justice, a symbol of the fight against discrimination. They praised her for standing up during such a difficult time and thanked her for showing them they weren't alone. Finally, someone brave enough to stand up against racism and the abuse of power, one post shared. Jasmine is a role model for all of us on how to fight for justice, no matter the threats. However, there was no shortage of opposing voices. Some criticized Jasmine, claiming her actions were an abuse of power and that she had no right to criticize the system or those with differing views. But Jasmine wasn't concerned with those critiques. She knew that struggles like these always had two sides, and she had chosen to stand on the right one. "Thank you, Jasmine, for showing me the power of justice. You're the one who makes me believe in change," one supporter wrote. "Jasmine, you're fighting not just for yourself, but for all of us." "We need people like you in this world," another post shared. But almost immediately, a critic's comment appeared. "This is an abuse of power. Let Avery do her job. This is reverse discrimination." The debates grew more heated, but Jasmine didn't let it shake her. She had made her decision to fight for what was right, and no one could sway her from that path. With each supportive message, with each share from the community, Jasmine felt her purpose strengthening. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the oppressed, the insulted, the silenced. This was a battle she wouldn't abandon. The war for justice was far from over, but Jasmine knew she had made her stand, and it was only a matter of time before it sparked a change that would resonate far beyond her own story. After Jasmine's story went viral, she became a symbol of resilience and justice. Posts, videos, and comments flooded social media platforms, not only supporting Jasmine but also praising her as a model of courage. People who had always felt oppressed or discriminated against found hope and strength in Jasmine, seeing in her the boldness they longed for. Jasmine is the true defender of justice. One tweet shared thousands of times proclaimed, "Thank you for fighting not only for yourself but for us. You are the role model I want to learn from." Another influential user commented, "Jasmine could feel the overwhelming support, and with each word of praise and encouragement, she realized her victory wasn't just a personal one anymore. Every compliment, every word of motivation made her feel as though she was fulfilling a much larger mission, not only for herself but for all those who had been hurt, disrespected, or ignored because of their differences." Looking back at everything she had been through, Jasmine realized that she hadn't just protected herself. She had stood up for those who couldn't protect themselves. She had become victorious in a battle not only for her own rights but for the justice of everyone who had suffered the sting of prejudice and discrimination. Now, the feeling of revenge didn't come solely from Avery being fired. It came from knowing she had fought for what was right. She had challenged a system built on discrimination and abuse of power. Jasmine felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she realized she had done it. She was not only a personal victor, but a symbol of change. As the support from the online community continued to spread, Jasmine decided to share one last powerful message, not just to those who had supported her, but to everyone who had ever felt unjustly treated or discriminated against. At a small gathering where she had been invited to speak, Jasmine stood firm on the stage, the lights shining down on her face, full of resolve and determination. She looked out at the audience, feeling the collective expectation and support in the air. "We must always stand up for justice, not only for ourselves but for all the vulnerable," Jasmine began, her voice steady and filled with power. "Today, we are not just fighting for personal gain. Every step we take, every word we say has the power to create change. Never let the forces of oppression and discrimination push you back." She paused, her gaze firm and unyielding as she scanned the room, letting the weight of her words sink in. "My story isn't just a personal story of revenge. It's not just about Avery being fired. It's about ensuring that we can no longer allow injustice to persist. Each and every one of us has the right to stand up, and we can never give up when faced with injustice." The entire auditorium fell silent, as if every word Jasmine spoke was a direct blow to the consciousness of those listening. She had become a model not only of strength, but also of morality, courage, and the determination to fight against oppression. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," Jasmine continued, her voice slow and profound, "but for all those who have no voice, those who cannot defend themselves. This is the fight for justice, and I will always stand with the oppressed." Jasmine ended her speech with a soft smile. But that smile wasn't just a sign of personal satisfaction. It was the smile of someone who had fulfilled their mission. Not just a personal victory, but a victory for all those who had been oppressed.